Hello, or as you say in the islands, aloha. I'm here to pay tribute to one of the great ones of what has been called the greatest generation. That generation, as you know, and has been called, was born before World War II, fought the good battle in World War II, won the war, came back to this country, and built a better country for all of us. And the name of that person to whom I pay tribute is Roy R. Bright of Honolulu, Hawaii. He's my brother. Roy and I are the only two survivors left from the Morris Bright and Lena Bright family. Morris and Lena Bright came from different parts of Russia, both immigrated to the United States, both found their way into Duluth, Minnesota, and in about 1906 got married, and they moved north to the Iron Range of Minnesota to a little town of McKinley, where my father opened a general store, and they started a new life for themselves. My family consisted of both my parents and 5 children. The oldest was Joan, according to their birth dates in my father's citizenship papers. Joe was born in 1907. He became a very good and successful Minnesota lawyer later. Mabel, my sister, was a teacher, a beautiful lady, a fine pianist. She was born in 1909, and she lived with her husband in Sterling, Illinois. Both of them were born in Duluth. The next one came along was my brother Leo. He was born in 1913, and then 2 years later came Roy. He was born in 1915, and then tagging along was Myron. I'm Myron Bright, and I was born in 1919. Roy, as I said, or as you may know, is 99 years of age and going on 100. And we hope that he will make it, although his health has not been the best in the last few months. I want to tell you a little bit about the family. First is my dad, and that picture was taken early on, probably about 1929. Then my mother, whose name was Lena, and her only daughter, Mabel, and they're both together. And then the 4 Bright brothers, Joe, Leo, Roy, and Myron. And that photo was taken on my mother's 90th birthday, 1970. This tribute is mainly about Roy and his heroic service to this country in World War II. Out of Hawaii, he was stationed at Hickam Field all during that war, and then about his life and his contribution to Hawaii after the war. Roy, the man, really came from Roy, the boy. And he was a pretty feisty kid, let me tell you that. We're Jewish, we were raised Jewish. My mother and father were both Jewish immigrants, and Roy had a bar mitzvah when he was 13 years of age. A bar mitzvah is where a young Jewish boy reaches the age of religious maturity at the age of 13. And Roy had his bar mitzvah in the city of Evelyn, Minnesota, and he had 2 shiners. He got in a little fight a couple of weeks before his bar mitzvah. He didn't say much about it except, "You should have seen the other guy." Roy went to school in the schools of Gilbert, Minnesota, but mostly in the schools of Evelyn, Minnesota, up on the Minnesota Iron Range, where my folks settled. I might mention that my father had a general retail business, first in the little town of McKinley, Minnesota, and then after a few years, he moved east about 5 miles to the town of Gilbert, Minnesota, and then in 1927, he moved another 5 miles east I've got the directions mixed up. Moved another 5 miles west to Evelyn, Minnesota, where he ran the business till his death in 1954. And then my brother Leo took over, and some years later, the store closed. But Roy, after high school, he was a football player, he was a musician, he played in the orchestra, and he was a swimmer. He lettered in both those sports. And he was a very active person. He went to not only high school in Evelyn, Minnesota, but 3 years of junior college. And so I'll show you right now a few pictures of Roy in his earlier days. He was a pretty good-looking young man, and he was a pretty athletic guy. And I might say he had a very good school career, good marks, good activities, and he was well liked. After Roy had finished his junior college, he matriculated at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and he graduated there in, I think, 1939. He tried salesmanship for a couple of years, wasn't too happy on it. Then he decided, as it looked like we might be getting into trouble with the war in Europe, and also the war in Asia, he decided to become an Air Corps pilot. He didn't quite make the pilot position, but he did become a navigator. And he did become, by the way, a very, very good navigator. Indeed, one of the best navigators in the 5th Bomb Group of the 7th Air Force stationed at Hickam Field, Hawaii. Roy got his commission, as I recall, as a second lieutenant in January of 1941. Of course, Pearl Harbor didn't happen until almost 12 months later in December. But Roy, fortunately, was not in Pearl Harbor at the time, was in the process of ferrying airplanes from the mainland to Pearl Harbor, and he missed the bombing, but he came to Pearl Harbor thereafter. Roy participated in the war battles after Pearl Harbor, and indeed in almost every major battle in the Pacific theater, in all of the Pacific theaters. He had 50 missions, and he was a highly decorated person. As a matter of fact, you take a look at this award group, and as I remembered, he had the Silver Star. Silver Star is one of the highest awards our government gives to its servicemen. His was awarded for gallantry in action. He had the Distinguished Flying Cross twice, and he mentioned that one occasion was for the bombing of Wake Island with 2 other planes, and it was a great mission, very successful, and that's one of the DFCs, and he had a second DFC. He also had the Bronze Star Medal, which is given for meritorious service, and he had the Air Medal. 8 times he had the Air Medal, and another medal given to him that was very significant for service during the war years was the Commendation Medal. In addition to that, he had the usual awards and medals that a serviceman who participated in, as Roy did, I said, 50 missions. By the way, I should mention that in 2007, I went to a ceremony at Hickam Field where they gave Roy his Silver Star. He'd earned it in 1942, but he never received it until that time. But he did receive it in 1957. His Silver Star, by the way, related to a most dangerous mission of over 8,000 miles onto enemy territory on a photographing mission prior to invasion. It was a very hazardous mission and a very successful one, and Roy deserved, I say, from what I understand, the award that he got from his government. Roy told me about some of his war work, and he said that the Midway battle was most significant. And he also mentioned an incident where he was given a special task of an emissary from Washington, D.C., who had to see General MacArthur, who was then in Australia. And so Roy was given the task of flying this emissary from Hawaii to Australia, where the emissary saw General MacArthur and to talk about war in the Pacific. You know, in those days, they didn't have the sophisticated methods for navigation that they have now. They used celestial means and also dead reckoning. I said to Roy, "It must have been awful tough." Well, he said, "You better do your reckoning right or you're dead." And that was the way it was, and unfortunately, some didn't. Roy, in 1944, married a very beautiful lady. Her name was Dorothea Smith. She'd been born and raised in the Hawaiian Islands. To me, she always looked somewhat like Greer Garson. She was a very, very beautiful lady. And Roy and Doe had 3 fine sons. Robert, who was in the Vietnam War and unfortunately is deceased. He contracted a war-related disease and died a couple of years ago. Bill William, who lives in Hawaii, and he and his wife Faith have 2 children, Roy's grandchildren, and they're all have been very, very good to Roy. And of course, he's been very good to them. And Roy has a 3rd son, John, who's a real estate person, lives in California, and has a son and daughter. So Roy has 4 grandchildren. Following the war, Roy settled in Hawaii. You know, he once told me, he said, "Myron," he said, "when I went to the islands from northern Minnesota where we had all this cold weather, I looked around, the sun, the palm trees, the ocean, the sand. I'm never going back." And he didn't. He came back for a visit, but he never came back. And he had a very successful business life in Hawaii. He was president of a corporation that distributed RCA television products. He did well. He did so well that he retired, as a matter of fact, at age 55 years. So he did pretty well, and then he engaged in various businesses and investments and other types of work in the Hawaiian Islands, and he did well. And he also engaged himself in a number of civic ventures, both in the islands of Hawaii and in the capital city of Honolulu. I might mention that Roy had a 90th birthday celebration, and the governor and the 2 senators, Governor Lingle and Senator Akaka and Daniel Kaye, all wrote Roy, wished him a happy birthday, and among the comments were from Daniel Kaye Inouye said, "You have witnessed as well as experienced some of the most important events in the history of the United States." Governor Lingle said, as a member of the 54th Bomb Group of the 7th Air Force during World War II at Hickam Field, you were considered one of the best navigators. And she wished him a very memorable birthday, and it was a memorable one. And the Senator Akaka wrote, "You have seen and been an active participant in making great changes to the world, our nation and Hawaii. beginning with your gallant service in World War II. You have made the world a better place in which to live for all of us. Thank you for all that you have done. We really owe you a debt of gratitude. I've got a couple other pictures of Roy. One is a picture when he was rather had a high rank. He was then lieutenant colonel, and then we'll come to the ending of this little tribute. Roy, I think you've cast great credit on the family of Morris Bright and Lena Bright, and as the only surviving brother, I'm really very fond of you, and I love you very much, and I'm very proud of you. Fortunately, we've had a good association over the past 25 years. I've been able to come to see you on several occasions, and you've seen me on several occasions. So I say to you again, aloha, which is hello, goodbye, whatever, and mahalo, thanks. I congratulate you, and you've lived a wonderful, wonderful life. And so we're going to end this little tribute with my favorite picture of Roy, which was when he was a captain, and he was in his seat as a navigator, and he has that very warm smile or grin on his face. He was in his element in the military, and he did a wonderful, wonderful job. Thank you again, Roy, and we'll be seeing you. Goodbye now. Aloha.